Before cities rose from the earth, before words were spoken or written, there was silence, a world untouched by civilization, a time when survival was the only language, and every sunrise was a battle between life and death. More than 2 million years ago, in the wild plains of Africa, a creature took its first uncertain steps on 2 feet. It did not know it was beginning a story, our story. With crude stones as tools and caves as shelter, early humans carved their existence out of chaos. Fire became their ally, tools became their strength, and imagination became the spark that would one day shape the future. The marks they left in cave walls, in the ashes of ancient fires, and in the bones buried beneath the earth tell us who we once were and how far we've come. This is the journey from Homo habilis to Homo sapiens, from the first flicker of fire to the first whisper of thought, a tale of survival, curiosity, and awakening, the dawn of what it means to be human. Welcome to the dawn of humanity. In the mists of time, around 2.5 million years ago, the Earth was untamed, filled with predators, dense forests, and endless plains. Here, the first humans appeared. They were not like us. Their bodies were smaller, their jaws stronger, and their voices more like cries than speech. But within them burned something extraordinary: curiosity. With rough hands and sharp stones, they began to shape the world around them. A simple rock, struck against another, became a blade, the first tool, and with that, the first spark of civilization was born. They learned that tools could help them cut meat, crack bones, and dig roots. Every strike of stone was a step forward, a fight against extinction. Yet, nature was relentless. Storms raged, predators lurked, hunger loomed. To survive, they moved, following the rivers, chasing herds, adapting to every challenge. Then came fire, a discovery that changed everything. Fire gave warmth, safety, and perhaps for the first time, a reason to gather. Around the firelight, humans began to share food, protect one another, and maybe tell their first stories. From that moment on, humanity began to evolve, not just through strength, but through imagination, cooperation, and shared purpose. Stone became a tool, fire became light, and together they became the foundation of civilization itself. Time moved on. Thousands of years passed. Ice covered vast lands, then slowly retreated as the world began to warm. Amid these great changes, early humans adapted. They were no longer just surviving, they were learning to live together. This was the dawn of the Mesolithic Age, a time when humans began to realize that their greatest strength was not muscle, but unity. In fertile valleys near rivers, small groups began to settle for longer periods. They found safe caves or built shelters from branches and animal skins. They hunted together, shared food, and discovered the meaning of cooperation. For the first time, humans began to think not only about today, but also tomorrow. They stored food, kept fires burning through the night, and taught their children how to survive, This was the birth of community. Nights were filled with firelight, laughter, and perhaps songs echoing softly against the stone walls. On those walls, they left mysterious paintings, handprints, deer, wild animals. They weren't decorations, they were stories. These cave paintings, found in places like Lascaux in France and Sulawesi in Indonesia, are proof that humans had begun to think symbolically. Their minds were awakening. Then came the first language. No longer mere grunts or cries, but sounds that carried meaning. Words for water, fire, and food. With language came cooperation, and with cooperation came trust. In a world full of danger, trust was survival. Together, they could hunt the mighty mammoth, face predators, and protect their young. Roles began to form: hunters, gatherers, caretakers, protectors. These roles became the foundation of something much greater: society. Around the fires and stone tools, a new awareness emerged. They were no longer alone. Each person was part of something larger than themselves. Perhaps this was the first spark of empathy, the instinct to help the weak, to care for the wounded, to mourn for the dead. They buried their loved ones, marking graves with stones and flowers. It was a sign that they had begun to understand the meaning of life and death. From cold nights and rough hands, from the rhythm of fire and stone, came a new feeling: belonging. They were no longer just surviving, they had learned to live together. And from that unity, the path towards civilization slowly began to unfold, a long journey that would lead to farming, to metal, and finally, to the world we live in today. The world had changed. Ice melted, forests thickened, rivers carved their way through fertile valleys. Humans, once wanderers of the wild, began to settle. They had endured fear and hardship, and now they were about to discover something extraordinary: control over nature. This was the beginning of the Neolithic Age. People started noticing the smallest patterns. Seeds dropped into the soil would sprout new life after the rain. From that simple observation, humanity's greatest transformation began: the birth of agriculture. They learned to plant wheat, barley, and rice. They began to understand the rhythm of the earth: rain, sun, season, and soil. For the first time, humans were not at the mercy of nature. They could shape it. With crops came stability. With stability came abundance. And with abundance came time. Time to think, to create, to build. Villages began to appear along riverbanks. Mud brick houses stood in rows. Smoke rose from clay ovens. Children ran through the fields as women ground grain and men herded animals. It was the sound of life, of home. For the first time, people truly belonged somewhere. And from that belonging came a new idea: this land is ours. That idea changed everything. Land became valuable. Disputes arose. From the need to organize came leadership. Wise elders and strong figures began guiding their people, distributing food, planning harvests, settling conflicts. They were respected, sometimes even worshipped. At night, under a canopy of stars, they spoke of gods, spirits, and the mysteries of life. spirituality was born. Across the world, sacred sites like Göbekli Tepe and Stonehenge rose great stones, standing against time, built by hands guided by faith and wonder. Yet life on the land was not easy. Droughts destroyed crops, floods swept through villages, and so humans adapted, once again, not by wandering, but by thinking ahead. They built irrigation canals, stored water, and shaped clay into jars. From their struggle, technology was born. Their tools became sharper, their houses stronger, their minds keener. They discovered copper, the first metal to bend to human will. Villages grew into towns. Towns grew into the world's first cities, like Jericho and Çatalhöyük. In these early cities, trade flourished. People exchanged food for tools, ornaments, and animals. From trade came connection, and from connection, culture. Language evolved, art blossomed, music filled the air. Patterns and colors adorned their homes, their pottery, their clothes. Humanity was no longer just surviving, it was expressing itself. But abundance also brought desire. With more resources came greed, inequality, and power. Social classes began to form: leaders, workers, artisans, priests. Some lived in comfort, while others toiled in the fields. Yet, amid these differences, something profound emerged: curiosity. People began to watch the stars, chart the seasons, and seek to understand the universe. The first science was born: astronomy, mathematics, and eventually, writing. Marks on clay tablets became records, stories, and memory, the first steps toward history itself. From fire and stone, from river and field, humanity built a new world. A world no longer ruled by nature, but shaped by the human mind. The agricultural revolution was not just an innovation, it was a turning point in the story of us all. It was here that humans, for the first time, became the architects of their own destiny. Fire had long been humanity's companion, bringing warmth to the frozen night, light to the darkness, and safety from beasts that roamed the wild. But now, in the hands of a thinking species, fire became something more, a tool to reshape the world. Somewhere in a forgotten valley, a spark changed everything. A strange rock, when placed near the flames, began to melt, glowing red, flowing like liquid sunlight, and hardening again into shining metal. In that moment, without realizing it, humanity crossed into a new era, the Age of Metal. From fire and stone, a new power was born. Metal was not just material, it was possibility itself. The first metal was copper. Early humans shaped it into knives, hooks, and ornaments. But copper was soft. It bent. It broke. Then came an accidental miracle. The discovery that copper mixed with tin created something far stronger: bronze. Bronze gleamed with beauty, but its true gift was strength. It could cut, carve, and endure. With bronze, humanity learned not only to survive, but to build. Villages grew into centers of trade. People traveled across deserts and rivers, exchanging grain, stones, and art for metal. Along the mighty rivers of the Euphrates, Tigris, and Nile, cities rose: Uruk, Sumer, Memphis, Thebes. They built high walls, tall temples, and palaces for kings. From fields and forges, civilization was born. Humanity had become the master of land and flame, but power always comes with a shadow. The same metal that built plows could also forge weapons, and thus began the first great wars. Across the plains of Mesopotamia, kings gathered bronze-clad armies. They conquered, they ruled, they expanded, writing their stories not in ink, but in fire and blood. Yet war brought something else: organization. To rule empires, humans needed records, so they invented writing. On soft clay tablets with wedge-shaped marks, they recorded trade, laws, and prayers. These symbols, cuneiform, were humanity's first step into history. Across the world, civilization spread like fire. In Egypt, the pharaohs built pyramids to defy death itself. In the Indus Valley, streets ran straight and water flowed through man-made channels. In China, bronze became sacred, used to honor ancestors and gods. Humanity had begun to shape destiny. But progress came at a cost. Inequality grew. Kings lived in luxury while peasants toiled. The rulers called themselves gods, and with divine power came tyranny. Metal became a symbol of control. Whoever controlled metal controlled the world. Then came a darker, stronger discovery: iron. Iron lacked bronze's beauty, but it surpassed its strength. It was harder, sharper, and far more abundant. With iron, humanity entered a new era of power and violence. The Iron Age forged empires: Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. Roads were built, armies professionalized, and the laws of nations carved into stone. The world became a stage of conquest, but also of knowledge. In Babylon, scholars mapped the stars and measured time. In Egypt, architects built with geometry and precision beyond imagination. In Greece, philosophers sought not only how the world worked, but why. From metal and fire came science, art, and philosophy. Humanity began to understand not just the world, but itself. Poets wrote, artists sculpted, musicians played melodies that echoed through temples and palaces. Bronze and iron became more than tools. They became the voice of expression. Every civilization added its note to the growing symphony of human culture. From Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, from Egypt to the islands of the East, humans began to define beauty, belief, and identity. Yet as empires rose higher, they began to crumble under their own weight. The same fire that built their glory burned them down. Cities fell, kingdoms vanished, but their legacy, their metal, their words, their dreams endured. For the first time, humanity understood something eternal. Civilizations die, but knowledge survives. From the hammer's strike and the flame's roar, humanity forged not just weapons and tools, but ideas. And ideas cannot be destroyed. By the end of the Metal Age, humans had built cities, written laws, explored the stars, and questioned their place in the cosmos. They had become not merely survivors, but creators of their own destiny. From fire, from earth, from metal, humanity had forged the world we live in today. And in every echo of the hammer, in every glimmer of steel, we still hear the heartbeat of our ancestors, the eternal rhythm of creation, ambition, and hope.
The fire that never died. Humanity had come far. From small villages and fertile plains, people began to look beyond survival and ask a new question. Can we create something that lasts longer than our lives? From that question, civilization was born. Across the great river valleys, the flame of humanity burned brighter, not merely for warmth, but for immortality. They built cities, carved stone, mapped the stars, and told stories of gods. This was the classical era, when humankind learned the art of thought, beauty, and purpose. From Egypt to Greece, from India to China, the ancient world shared one belief. Life is not only about surviving, but about leaving a mark. Egypt, the legacy of the river. Along the Nile, a civilization arose that would shape eternity, ancient Egypt. The river was not just water, it was the heartbeat of the land, the gift of the gods. From its rhythm came abundance, and from belief came monuments of stone and soul. They built pyramids, not merely tombs, but stairways to eternity. Stone by stone, they sought not comfort, but immortality. In the hieroglyphs carved deep in temple walls, they spoke of life, death, and the journey of the soul. Pharaohs were seen as divine, guardians between the earth and the heavens. Under the blazing sun, art, mathematics, and astronomy flourished. They studied the stars, measured time, and learned to preserve the body, the mummy, symbol of humankind's longing for eternal life. Egypt taught the world that knowledge could make one live forever, not in flesh, but in legacy. Greece, birthplace of the free mind. Across the sea, another light emerged. Greece. Here, people believed that humans were not slaves to gods, but seekers of truth. From this belief came philosophy. Socrates asked, "What is truth?" Plato dreamed of perfect forms. Aristotle dissected logic and nature. In marble cities like Athens, humanity dared to think freely. They built democracy, gave birth to theater, and celebrated the beauty of both body and mind. For them, art was divine, and thought was sacred. But freedom has a price. From Athens to Sparta, wars erupted, proof that even noble ideas are fragile. Yet, though their cities fell, their ideas survived. The Greek mind lives on. In every question we still ask. India and China, eternal souls of the East. Far to the east, wisdom took a different form. Along the Indus and Ganges rivers, India gave birth to deep spirituality. From its soil grew Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, philosophies that explored balance, karma, and the meaning of existence. In their temples, humanity searched inward rather than outward. Meanwhile, in China, emperors built harmony through discipline and order. From Confucius came morality and social duty. From Lao Tzu, the Tao, the way of nature and flow. They wrote on silk, invented paper, compass, and gunpowder, gifts that would one day change the world. The East sought not glory through conquest, but through wisdom. They taught the true power lies not in the sword, but in the stillness of the mind. Rome, power, law, and decline. From the ashes of Greece rose an empire, Rome. What Greece imagined, Rome built. From a small city by the Tiber, Rome grew into the greatest empire the world had ever known. They built roads, bridges, aqueducts, and laws. For the Romans, order was divine. Power had to be bound by justice. All men are equal before the law, a Roman idea that still lives today. But greatness breeds pride. Wealth turned to decadence, and strength to arrogance. The empire began to rot from within. Civil wars and corruption consumed its heart. And so Rome fell, not by enemies alone, but by its own reflection. Yet, even in ruin, its legacy endured. Architecture, language, law, and the dream of civilization. Rome proved that empires die, but ideas endure. Immortal through knowledge and soul. When the classical world ended, humanity did not vanish, it evolved. From the sands of Egypt, the stones of Greece, and the scrolls of Rome, humans left behind something far greater than power: wisdom. They wrote, they taught, they dreamed. From Alexandria to Athens, from Varanasi to Chang'an, the flame of knowledge passed on. It burned quietly, waiting for new hands to carry it forward. That flame became the foundation of every science, art, and philosophy we know today. The classical era was not just a time, but a mirror. In it, humanity learned how to become immortal, not by living forever, but by ensuring that their creations never die. Every building, every manuscript, every idea born in that age still whispers to us. As long as we keep asking, learning, and dreaming, the ancient world still lives within us all.
The dim sky. The classical world had fallen silent. Rome was gone. Its marble cities turned to dust. Roads vanished beneath wild grass. Knowledge faded into whispers. Europe sunk into chaos, an age later called the Dark Ages. But even in darkness, a spark survived. In monasteries, monks copied ancient texts by candlelight, preserving the wisdom of the ancients. And in the deserts of Arabia, a new light was rising: Islam. From its sands came faith, justice, and learning. Two worlds, East and West, began to move in opposite directions, yet bound by destiny. Humanity entered a new era, the Middle Ages, when darkness and light walked hand in hand. The light from the East. While Europe struggled, the East flourished. Cities like Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo shone with brilliance. Here, ancient Greek and Roman knowledge was translated, protected, and reborn. Al-Khwarizmi created algebra. Avicenna, or Ibn Sina, wrote the canon of medicine. Astronomers mapped the heavens. Architects built mosques that reached for the sky. Science and faith lived together in harmony. Trade along the Silk Road connected worlds: silk from China, spices from the islands, gold from Africa. The earth became smaller, brighter, and more connected. The Islamic Golden Age became the bridge between the ancient world and the modern one. Knights, kings, and holy wars. In Europe, the pulse of civilization began to return. Castles rose, Knights swore oaths of loyalty, faith, and honor, though ambition often shadowed those vows. The church grew powerful, uniting kingdoms under one cross, and in its name, millions marched east to claim Jerusalem. The Crusades had begun. Men crossed seas and deserts, driven by faith and fear alike. But holy wars are never pure. Cities burned, innocents perished, and humanity once again learned how belief could both inspire and destroy. Yet, even in bloodshed, cultures met, exchanging art, science, and philosophy. From conflict, knowledge was reborn. The Far East, empires of harmony. While Europe fought, the East refined. Under the Tang and Song dynasties, China became the center of the world. They invented printing, the compass, and gunpowder, three creations that would forever change humanity. In Japan, samurai rose, living by the code of honor and discipline. The spirit of Zen taught harmony within chaos. In India, kingdoms prospered through trade and spirituality. Across the seas, in the islands of Southeast Asia, empires like Srivijaya and Majapahit, commerce and culture, the world had never been more alive, a woven tapestry of ideas, faiths, and dreams. Shadows and sparks in Europe. Centuries passed, and Europe began to stir again. Monks became scholars, cathedrals became universities. Paris, Oxford, Bologna, the new centers of thought. Ancient wisdom, translated from Arabic, filled the libraries. But then came darkness once more, the Black Death. Between 1347 and 1351, it swept across Europe, claiming millions. The world stood still. Yet from despair rose resilience. Humanity questioned, learned, and sought meaning. The night was ending, and at dawn, the world would awaken again to the Renaissance. When light and darkness became one, the Middle Ages were not merely a dark time, they were twilight, a long, uncertain night before the rise of a new sun. From faith and war, from suffering and discovery, humankind learned balance. The East preserved wisdom, the West rediscovered it, and together they shaped the world we know. The Middle Ages taught us that every darkness holds a spark, and every spark, if protected, can light the world anew. Out of ruin and devotion came rebirth. Humanity stood ready once more to rediscover the universe and themselves.
Dawn over Europe. After centuries of silence, the world awoke. A new light pierced the mist of the Middle Ages. People began to look at life differently, through art, science, and reason. Thus began the Renaissance, rebirth. It was not merely the return of beauty, but the rediscovery of the human soul. Cities like Florence, Venice, and Rome became the heartbeat of a new world. The Medici family funded artists and thinkers who would reshape humanity's vision of itself. The Renaissance was not the rebirth of art, it was the rebirth of being human. The rebirth of art and beauty. In a small Florentine studio, Leonardo da Vinci faced a blank canvas. To others it was emptiness, to him infinity. He painted not only faces, but the unseen depths of the soul. The Mona Lisa smiled with the mystery of human existence itself. Michelangelo's David stood as a symbol of courage and defiance. Raphael and Botticelli turned brushstrokes into prayers.
Art was no longer only about God, it was about humanity as his reflection. Every sculpture, every line of paint whispered the same truth. Man is not beneath the heavens, he is part of its beauty. Science awakens. While artists painted, scientists observed. Galileo Galilei lifted his telescope toward the stars and declared, "The earth moves." It was a dangerous truth, but truth nonetheless. Copernicus, Kepler, and Vesalius expanded the map of knowledge. Humanity learned that the universe was not fixed, it evolved, just like thought. Science became the light that guided reason. Curiosity replaced fear, and in that moment, humankind began to dream again. The age of words and ideas. Then came Gutenberg's printing press, a humble invention that changed everything. Knowledge, once hidden in monasteries, now flowed freely. Books crossed borders. Minds connected. Erasmus questioned morality. Machiavelli dissected power. Shakespeare gave voice to love, tragedy, and destiny. Humanity learned to speak not in fear, but in freedom. The Renaissance was not just a movement, it was a revolution of thought. A world reborn. From the harbors of Europe, ships sailed beyond the horizon. Columbus, Magellan, and da Gama charted oceans, redrawing the map of Earth. The age of discovery connected and divided the world. New trade, new ideas, and new greed emerged. But through it all, one fire never dimmed: curiosity. The desire to explore, to understand, to transcend limits. That was the pulse of the Renaissance. The human light. By the end of the 16th century, the world stood transformed. Art flourished, science soared, philosophy questioned all. Humanity learned that knowledge and imagination were the truest powers. The Renaissance taught us that we are not merely the children of creation, we are the stewards, its storytellers. From the ashes of the Middle Ages, mankind rose and whispered, "We have been reborn." The world opens. The 15th century marked the dawn of a new age. The once mysterious world began to unfold. From the ports of Lisbon, Seville, and Genoa, great ships set sail into the unknown. Columbus crossed the Atlantic, Vasco da Gama reached India, Magellan circled the globe. Humanity proved that the earth was round and courage could conquer fear. Yet behind discovery lay conquest, slavery, and greed. The world opened and humanity faced its reflection. The age of exploration was not just about finding new lands, it was about discovering ourselves. Wealth and wounds of the New World. Gold and silver poured into Europe. Spices, silk, and gemstones filled its ports. But millions paid the price. The native peoples of the Americas, the enslaved, the silenced. Exploration brought both progress and pain. Still, ideas flowed with the trade winds. New maps, new stars, new questions. And in Europe's universities, a generation dared to ask, if we can cross oceans, can we not cross the boundaries of thought? Thus began the scientific revolution. Copernicus placed the sun at the center. Galileo proved it and was condemned. Kepler found that planets moved in ellipses. Then came Isaac Newton, whose Principia Mathematica unified the heavens and the earth. Gravity became the bridge between stars and stones, the law that connected everything. Humanity realized that the universe was not chaos, but order. Thought and freedom. Francis Bacon taught that knowledge is power. Descartes declared, "I think, therefore I am." Science replaced superstition. Faith met reason. Observation became the new prayer. The scientific revolution was not just an era of invention, it was the birth of free thought itself. Truth, for the first time, belonged to all who dared to seek it. The tools of discovery. New instruments opened new worlds. The telescope, microscope, barometer, and thermometer changed how humanity saw reality. Hooke and Leavenworth discovered the microscopic universe. Harvey traced the flow of blood through the body. Curiosity became an unstoppable force. Knowledge spread across oceans and languages. From these discoveries, a greater storm gathered, the coming Industrial Revolution. The sky unfolds. By the end of the 17th century, humankind had redrawn its place in the cosmos. The world had been measured, mapped, and understood. But the greatest discovery was not of the heavens, it was of the human mind itself, the courage to question, to test, to know. The age of exploration and the scientific revolution were not the end, they were the awakening, and from their light, the next great chapter would rise, the age of enlightenment, when reason and humanity would finally walk as one. The world began to question. The 18th century rose like a dawn over an old world. After centuries of obedience and silence, humanity began to ask, were we created only to obey? Is reason not a divine gift meant to be used freely? From Paris to London, from Berlin to Edinburgh, people began to think for themselves. This was the age of enlightenment, the age when the light of reason pierced the darkness of ignorance, when logic challenged dogma and humanity challenged power. The sword no longer ruled, the mind did. Thinkers who changed the world. Great minds rose from every corner of Europe. Voltaire fought tyranny with wit sharper than any blade. John Locke declared that all men possess natural rights, life, liberty, and property. David Hume questioned everything. Adam Smith defined the invisible hand of the market. Immanuel Kant whispered, "Saper est, dare to know." Enlightenment was not only a movement of science, but a moral revolution. The belief that to think freely is to be fully human. Books that set the world on fire. Books became weapons. Diderot's encyclopedia gathered all knowledge. Rousseau's The Social Contract declared man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. Ideas crossed oceans and kingdoms, carried in secret and whispered in taverns. The belief spread that knowledge could liberate mankind. Science and rationality. Enlightenment expanded science beyond curiosity into a mission. Newton's legacy inspired generations who believed the universe was not divine chaos, but divine logic. Lavoisier named oxygen, Linnaeus classified life, Franklin captured lightning. Experiments became the universal language, reason the new faith. Revolution and the rise of the people. Words turned into action. 1776, the American Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. Then came 1789, the French Revolution. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Thrones fell, nations rose. The fire of enlightenment burned both bright and wild, bringing both freedom and chaos. Yet through it all, the core idea endured. Human beings have the right to shape their destiny. Reason, humanity, and the future. By the dawn of the 19th century, the world was forever changed. Kings trembled, the church yielded, and education spread like sunlight. Humanity discovered that the future is not fate, it is choice. The Enlightenment taught 3 eternal truths. 1. Reason is the highest light of mankind. 2. Freedom of thought is sacred. 3. True progress springs from compassion, not domination. Empires would rise and fall, wars would come and go, but the light of enlightenment would never die. It became the lamp carried by every generation that dared to dream of a better world. The dawn of a new world. The 18th century faded into twilight, but beneath the dimming light a new glow emerged, the glow of machines. In the valleys of England, among fog and rivers, factories rose like temples of a new faith. Smoke replaced clouds, iron replaced soil, and time replaced seasons. The sound of engines was the heartbeat of a new age, the Industrial Revolution. The beginning of change. It began with necessity. Populations grew, trade expanded, and hands could no longer keep up. James Watt refined the steam engine. Arkwright mechanized the spinning wheel. Textiles that once took days could now be made in hours. The world began to measure itself not by distance, but by speed. Cities of smoke and steel. Villages turned into cities. Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, names that echoed with the hum of progress. Yet progress came with pain. Children worked 14 hours a day. The poor filled crowded tenements, while the rich watched from marble halls. The rhythm of life no longer followed sunrise and sunset, but the ring of factory bells. Science and discovery. Science became the fuel of revolution. Faraday discovered electricity. Stephenson built locomotives. Whitney mechanized cotton. Knowledge and metal intertwined, forging an age where humanity sought to master nature itself. Steamships crossed oceans. Telegraphs carried voices across continents. The world, once vast, began to shrink. Society transformed. Wealth grew, but not equally. The working class emerged trapped between survival and exhaustion. Karl Marx called it the new slavery of industry. Yet from that struggle rose unions, education, and reform. Humanity began to realize Machines must serve man, not enslave him. A connected world. Industrialization turned empires into engines. Colonies became suppliers of raw materials. Factories became the heart of global power. Capitalism expanded, and with it came both innovation and inequality. But the exchange of ideas, cultures, and inventions created a world more connected than ever before. Man and machine. Humanity stood before its creation in awe. The machine was both mirror and monster, a reflection of ambition, and a warning of excess. Some feared it, some worshipped it, but none could deny it had forever changed what it meant to be human. The legacy of iron and steam. By the turn of the 20th century, the hum of machinery had become the anthem of civilization. Iron rails linked cities, electricity lit the nights, and the idea of progress became humanity's new religion. The Industrial Revolution gave us factories, locomotives, capitalism, and labor rights, but above all, it gave us momentum. From coal to current, from steel to silicon, from steam to the digital pulse, the spirit of invention endures. The Industrial Revolution was not just a change in tools, it was the awakening of human potential. The early 20th century, a world of promise and tension. At the dawn of the 1900s, humanity stood between wonder and ruin. Electricity illuminated cities that never slept. Machines moved faster than horses, and voices traveled through telegraph wires and early radios. It was the golden age of invention, an era of optimism, science, and empire. But beneath the glitter of progress, the world trembled. Great empires, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and Austria-Hungary, eyed each other with suspicion. National pride, fueled by industrial might and colonial conquest, turned into a dangerous competition. Armies grew larger, weapons deadlier, and alliances tighter. The world was advancing toward disaster. In Asia, Japan rose as a new power, defeating Russia in 1905, the first time an Asian nation defeated a European empire in modern warfare. Elsewhere, Africa, India, and Southeast Asia remained under colonial rule, their resources feeding the ambitions of Europe. The 20th century began with the hum of machines and the ticking of a bomb. World War I, the first firestorm. 1914. A single gunshot in Sarajevo echoed across the planet. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated, alliances ignited like dry leaves in the wind. In mere weeks, the world was at war. Trenches carved across Europe, deep scars in the earth, filled with mud, rats, and fear. Men lived and died between barbed wire and artillery fire, fighting not for conquest, but for survival. The air was filled with gas and smoke, the ground trembling under endless bombardment. It was the first mechanized slaughter in human history. From the Somme to Verdun, millions perished. Empires collapsed. The Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires faded into dust. When the war ended in 1918, the world stood in silence, not in victory, but in exhaustion. The Treaty of Versailles was meant to ensure peace, but it sowed bitterness and resentment instead. In the ashes of Europe, new nations were born, and old wounds began to fester. Between the wars, the lost generation. The 1920s glittered with jazz and dreams. Cities pulsed with energy. Cars filled the streets. Radios filled homes, and women's voices filled public life for the first time. The world danced to forget. But the rhythm stopped in 1929. The Great Depression crashed over the world like a tidal wave. Banks failed, factories closed, and millions stood in bread lines. In desperation, people turned to leaders who promised strength and revival. In Italy, Mussolini's fascism rose. In Germany, a bitter veteran named Adolf Hitler spoke of vengeance and destiny. In Japan, the Armin took power, hungering for empire. The peace of the world was eroding again, quietly, steadily, inevitably. World War II, the planet in flames. 1939. German tanks rolled into Poland. The world plunged once more into chaos. The Second World War was unlike anything before it. Faster, deadlier, total. Armies swept across continents, and skies rained fire. Europe fell under the shadow of the swastika. But resistance grew, in forests, in cities, in the hearts of the oppressed. In Asia, Japan's invasion of China left rivers of blood. In 1941, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States joined the war. The conflict spanned every ocean, every continent. It became not just a war of armies, but a war of ideals, tyranny versus freedom, fear versus hope. And then came the darkest chapter, the Holocaust. 6 million Jews and millions of others systematically exterminated in camps built for death. The world witnessed the depths of human cruelty and the resilience of those who survived. By 1945, cities like Berlin and Tokyo were reduced to rubble, and in August, 2 flashes of light over Japan ended the war and began the nuclear age. Hiroshima and Nagasaki became eternal warnings carved in ash and silence. When the war finally ended, more than 70 million lives had been lost. The earth itself seemed to sigh, weary, scarred, and forever changed. The Cold War began. Victory brought no peace. The old world order had vanished, replaced by 2 new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Both possessed unimaginable weapons. Both believed they held the key to humanity's future. The Iron Curtain fell across Europe, dividing the world in 2. It was a war fought not with bullets, but with fear. Spies in the shadows, missiles underground, and propaganda in every newspaper. The race for power extended beyond Earth itself, into the stars. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin orbited the planet. 8 years later, Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon. The world had gone from trenches to space in less than half a century. But even as humanity looked upward, its divisions deepened below. The age of division and discovery. The Cold War stretched across decades, shaping the second half of the 20th century. It was a silent conflict fought through ideology, technology, and influence. Each side sought to prove the superiority of its system, capitalism versus communism, by racing toward the future. Children practiced hiding under desks as nuclear drills became routine. Above them, satellites began to orbit the Earth, silent watchers of a planet poised between creation and destruction. Yet out of fear came progress. Transistors shrank computers from room-sized machines to tools that could fit on desks. Television connected homes to the world. Music, fashion, and art exploded into new forms of expression, each decade rewriting what it meant to be human. The wars within peace. While the Cold War froze diplomacy in Europe, the rest of the world boiled with struggle. In Asia, the Korean War split a nation in 2, a wound that remains open even today. In Vietnam, jungles burned and generations were lost as superpowers fought proxy battles for ideology. Across Africa and the Middle East, colonial empires collapsed. New nations emerged, often from borders drawn by others. Freedom came, but so did instability, as the old powers refused to release their grip completely. The 20th century became an age of contradictions. Never had so many people gained independence, and never had violence been so mechanized. The social revolutions. In the 1960s and 70s, people began to question everything. Students marched, women demanded equality, Black communities fought for civil rights. From Washington to Paris, from Mexico City to Jakarta, voices rose against oppression and silence. Music became rebellion. Bob Dylan, the Beatles, and others sang not of war but of peace. Television brought images of protest and brutality into every living room. The world could no longer pretend not to see. Technology continued to shrink the distance between hearts and continents. Jet planes, telephones, and satellites connected people faster than any empire ever could. And somewhere in California garages, engineers dreamed of personal computers, machines that would soon change everything. The fall of walls and the end of an era. By the 1980s, the world was tired of fear. The space race had reached its peak, and economies were shifting from factories to ideas. Then, in 1989, the symbol of division, the Berlin Wall, fell. Concrete cracked, and with it, decades of suspicion. Crowds danced on the ruins as the Cold War crumbled. Within 2 years, the Soviet Union dissolved and the map of the world was redrawn once more. The 20th century had begun in empires and trenches and ended with nations searching for unity. The modern awakening. The 1990s carried a strange lightness. Globalization, trade, and digital communication gave people the illusion of a connected world. The internet began as a quiet web of scientists and students, but soon grew into the nervous system of humanity. Voices, ideas, and dreams could travel at the speed of light. But progress brought new shadows. Genocides in Rwanda and the Balkans showed that hatred could still outpace compassion. As one century prepared to close, humanity realized that technology alone could not save it. What mattered was still the same: empathy, justice, and peace. Reflections on the Century of Fire. The 20th century was humanity's trial by flame. In less than 100 years, we went from horse-drawn carts to spaceflight, from telegrams to the internet, from kingdoms to a global community. But for every step forward, there was a cost. The cost of arrogance, greed, and ignorance. The world wars taught us the price of unchecked power. The Holocaust taught us the depth of cruelty. The atomic age taught us humility. And the rise of civil rights taught us that even the smallest voice can change history. Each invention, every movement, and all revolutions carried one unspoken question. What does it mean to be human in a world we can destroy or rebuild with our own hands? Epilogue. Humanity at the crossroads. As the 20th century ended, humanity stood again at a threshold. The new millennium promised wonders: digital connection, medical miracles, exploration of other worlds. But it also whispered warnings of climate change, inequality, and the fragility of truth in an age of information. The lessons of the century were carved deep into our memory: that progress without compassion leads to ruin, that unity without understanding breeds tyranny, and that the greatest battles are not fought between nations, but within ourselves. In the ashes of 2 world wars, humanity found its reflection. A creature capable of great cruelty and infinite kindness. A species still learning that survival is not enough, that we must also learn to live together. We began the century with fire and ended it with light. Between them, we found our humanity.
The 21st century did not begin with the roar of cannons or the march of victory parades. It began with a soft sound, the chime of a notification, a tiny digital signal, yet powerful enough to change the course of all humanity. We had entered an era where power was no longer measured by armies or empires, but by data, not by how much land one possessed, but by how wide a network one could weave. In the past, people fought to conquer territory. Now they fight to capture attention. That has become the new currency of our time: attention, time, and the human mind. The internet, once a simple network of scientists and academics, has become the beating heart of civilization. From the Himalayas to the African savannas, from Tokyo's apartments to Indonesian villages, the entire planet hums with connection. Distance has died, language has softened, and borders have blurred. But as we became more connected, the line between real and virtual, human and machine, began to fade. The birth of the digital world. The early 1990s marked the turning point. Personal computers entered homes and the internet seeped into everyday life. Email replaced letters, websites replaced libraries, and online forums became the new coffeehouses of the modern world. Everything felt new, and everything felt possible. Humanity had discovered a world without physical limits, a digital world. In it, ideas could travel faster than light, and knowledge could be shared without kings, priests, or borders. A new revolution began, the information revolution. Google emerged with a simple mission: to organize the world's information. Then came Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, not merely tools of communication, but global stages where every human could speak, perform, and protest. Power, once held by a few, now belonged to anyone holding a smartphone. Yet with freedom came chaos. Truth became relative, opinions became weapons, and privacy, once a sacred right, began to vanish. The communication revolution and the new human. Social media gave birth to a new kind of human, the digital native. They never knew a world without the internet, never waited weeks for a letter to arrive, never imagined a day without a camera in their pocket. They were born with 2 identities, one physical, one virtual. Every post, every comment, every emoji became part of a second self, a digital reflection of the soul. In this new world, recognition became necessity, and validation became a new form of love. But behind the glow of the screen lay long shadows: addiction, loneliness, the quiet erosion of genuine connection. We speak more, but listen less. We are surrounded by thousands of friends, yet at times we have no one to truly hold us. Big data, the new god of the modern world. Every click, every search, every heartbeat tracked by a smartwatch all became data, and data became the new gold. Corporations no longer mine the earth for oil or ore. They mine us, our habits, our desires, our fears. In the digital world, humanity itself became the resource. We are no longer merely users. We are the product. Algorithms study us, learn our patterns, and anticipate our thoughts. They know when we are sad, when we are hungry, and when we are vulnerable. And quietly, they begin to shape our decisions, not through force, but through suggestion. Here lies the great paradox of the digital age. We built technology to free ourselves, yet we are slowly becoming its servants.
the age of artificial intelligence. The 2020s ushered in the rise of artificial intelligence, machines that no longer simply obeyed commands, but learned, adapted, and even dreamed. AI was no longer a tool, it had become a partner, a rival, and perhaps a mirror of humanity itself. We created machines to think like us, but now they teach us new ways to think. They write poetry, compose music, paint masterpieces, and even code their own successors. A haunting question arises. If a machine can create, what does it mean to be human? To some, AI is salvation, a path to heal diseases, reverse climate damage, and solve problems beyond human limits. To others, it is a ticking bomb, a creation that may one day deem us obsolete. This is the turning point of history. Will we coexist with intelligence we built, or will it replace us? Crisis of identity and the search for meaning. Amid all the progress, a whisper echoes through humanity. Who are we? Are we merely clusters of data that algorithms can predict? Is our freedom real, or is it an illusion designed to make us feel in control? The digital age connected us like never before, yet somehow we've lost our sense of self. We know everything about the world, yet very little about our own hearts. People begin to seek meaning beyond the screens, through nature, meditation, art, and forgotten spiritual traditions. As if after conquering the digital universe, humankind finally realized that the hardest frontier left to explore is the inner one. The transformation of work and economy. Automation swept across the industries of the world. Machines replaced factory workers, algorithms replaced analysts, and self-driving vehicles began to fill the roads. Old jobs disappeared, and strange new ones took their place. The global economy evolved into a creative and digital economy. Value no longer came from physical goods, but from ideas. A musician in Lagos, a designer in Jakarta, and a programmer in Sao Paulo could collaborate and sell to the world in seconds. But not everyone was ready. The digital divide split the planet between those who could connect and those who could not. One half raced toward the future, the other remained stranded in the past. Living in simulation. Virtual reality, augmented reality, and the metaverse offered a new dimension, a space where imagination became habitat. People worked, studied, and fell in love inside simulated worlds. Everything felt real, yet nothing truly existed. Here, the boundary between human and machine grew thinner than ever. Is reality something we experience, or merely what we believe? If the digital world can perfectly imitate life, does that mean life can be copied? Some call this the age of simulation, a time when we no longer live in reality, but in its reflection. And a question looms over all of us. Do we still control the system, or are we already part of its code? Hope, the birth of collective consciousness. Amid the noise and confusion, hope still shines. For the first time in history, humanity can communicate, learn, and act as one. The internet allows global solidarity, from climate movements to humanitarian aid across continents. Algorithms may divide, but empathy unites. We begin to understand that technology is not our enemy. It is our mirror. It reflects the best and worst of who we are. And in that reflection, we are given a choice, to rise or to fall. Perhaps the true purpose of the digital age is not to make machines think like humans, but to remind humans how to think like humans again. Epilogue, a world of one mind. Now humanity stands connected by invisible threads, billions of cables, signals, and frequencies pulsing across the earth. We share ideas, dreams, laughter, and pain in the same digital space. We have built something unprecedented, a collective global consciousness. But every great civilization faces its test. The digital age demands wisdom because a single mistake can ripple across the planet. We live in a world that grows smarter every day, but we must strive to remain wise. History repeats itself, but this time the authors are not kings or scientists. It is us. Every click, every word, every choice becomes ink in the story of humankind. And perhaps this is the summit of our journey from the caves. The same species that once painted on stone walls now writes in pixels and code. And yet the essence remains unchanged, the yearning to be understood, to connect, to leave a mark. And within the endless stream of data that flows through our world, we rediscover a simple truth. Though the world may now be linked by networks, what truly connects us is still the human heart.
Introduction. The same sky above us all. Since the dawn of history, humankind has always looked up at the sky with wonder and curiosity. To ancient civilizations, the heavens were the dwelling place of gods, the realm where dreams and prayers ascended. But as knowledge grew, we began to realize that the sky was not a divine veil, it was the infinite cosmos, vast, silent, and beautiful. And within that revelation lay our greatest truth. We are but stardust, drifting in a sea of stars. Yet instead of despair, that truth ignited a fire of courage. Human beings were not content to be mere spectators of the universe. We wanted to walk among the stars, to explore, to understand, and one day to leave our footprints upon them. Act 1. The birth of a dream. It did not begin with rockets, but with imagination. From the words of Jules Verne, who dreamed of voyages to the moon, to the visionary theories of Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, who once said, "The earth is the cradle of humanity, but mankind cannot remain in the cradle forever." In the 20th century, that dream began to take shape. The Cold War divided the world, but it also fueled one of humanity's greatest races, not to dominate the earth, but the heavens. In 1957, Sputnik 1 pierced the silence of space. That small metallic sphere, no larger than a beach ball, sent out a steady beeping signal that echoed across the globe, the first heartbeat of humankind beyond Earth. Just 4 years later, Yuri Gagarin became the first human to see our planet from above. In his trembling voice, filled with awe, he whispered, "I see Earth. It is so beautiful." And with those words, humanity's perspective shifted forever. For the first time, we saw our home not as nations or borders, but as one fragile blue planet floating in the vastness of space. Act 2. A Step on the Moon. 1969, the year the impossible became real. As Neil Armstrong descended the lunar ladder, millions across the Earth held their breath. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. It wasn't just a technological triumph, it was a victory of spirit. That step represented more than human achievement. It was a declaration. The limits we see are only temporary. Thousands of scientists, engineers, and dreamers had worked tirelessly for this single moment. And as Armstrong's boot pressed into the lunar dust, It was as if the entire species had taken that step together. But after the celebration faded, a quiet question emerged. What now? After the moon, humanity looked down again, burdened by wars, politics, and earthly chaos. The momentum of exploration slowed, and the fire of adventure flickered. But beneath the silence, seeds of the future were quietly growing, in research labs, garages, and in the minds of those who refused to stop dreaming. Act 3. The dawn of a new space age. The 21st century brought with it a new dawn, the era of private and collaborative space exploration. Rockets were no longer the domain of governments alone. Private pioneers like SpaceX, Blue Origin, and others began reshaping the path to the stars. Reusable rockets landed gracefully back on Earth, something once thought impossible. Small satellites created a web of global internet, connecting even the remotest corners of our planet. Space was becoming open, not just for astronauts, but for humanity itself. And suddenly, conversations that once belonged to science fiction were happening in real boardrooms and classrooms. Returning to the moon, colonizing Mars, mining asteroids, protecting Earth from space debris. The dream was alive again, no longer as fantasy, but as an unfolding chapter of human history. Act 4. Mars, the second step. Mars, the red planet that has fascinated us for centuries. It is both a symbol of our future and a mirror of our fears. A barren world that reminds us what could happen to our own. When the first rover touched its dusty surface, humanity touched it too. Every image it sent back was a whisper from another world. And hidden in those silent pictures was a message. We are coming. Colonization plans began taking shape. Designs for self-sustaining habitats, solar energy farms, and even Martian agriculture emerged. The question was no longer if we could go, but how we could survive once we arrived. Yet, as science advanced, moral questions deepened. Do we have the right to alter another planet before healing our own? Are we explorers or escapees? Mars became more than a scientific goal. It became a spiritual mirror, forcing us to ask, what does it mean to be the guardians of life? Act 5. Reaching for the stars. After Mars, humanity looked further, to the distant stars and beyond. The Voyager probes, launched decades ago, had already left our solar system, carrying a golden record that says simply, "We were here." Meanwhile, telescopes like James Webb began peering deeper into space than ever before. They revealed ancient galaxies, newborn stars, and perhaps other worlds like ours. Thousands of exoplanets have been discovered, some rocky, some with oceans, some orbiting suns like our own. The search for life out there became a search for understanding down here. The more we discovered, the more we realized the universe is vast beyond comprehension, and yet we are a part of it. Each discovery was not just scientific, It was spiritual. It reminded us that we too are the universe trying to understand itself. Act 8. The era of cosmic cooperation. In the distant future, humanity may build massive orbital habitats, rotating cities that simulate gravity and atmosphere. Nations that once competed now collaborate, for in space there is no room for pride or politics. Children are born in orbit. They grow up seeing Earth not as their home, but as a glowing blue star in the sky. They call themselves not Earthlings, but citizens of the cosmos. Humanity finally becomes truly universal, not because we have conquered the universe, but because we've learned to live within it, together. Epilogue. We, the children of the stars. Everything we are, our bones, our blood, our breath, was once part of a dying star. We are the universe, made conscious, looking back upon itself. From the caves to the cities, from the earth to the stars, our journey has always been the same: to understand who we are and why we exist. Perhaps one day, far from now, when humans walk under the light of another sun, they will look up at the alien sky and smile, remembering.
It all began with a single glance at the night and a single dream that we could be more than we are. Among the stars, the story of humanity will continue, not written on stone or paper, but carried on waves of light across the void. Because in the end, the greatest journey of humankind is not into space, but into understanding itself. Introduction. The new fire. Human history has always been defined by its tools. Fire gave us warmth and protection. The wheel gave us movement. Electricity gave us light. But in the 21st century, humanity discovered a new kind of fire: intelligence itself. Artificial intelligence, once a dream of mathematicians and philosophers, has become the next evolutionary leap. It is not merely a tool we wield, but a reflection of our own minds, a mirror made of code and silicon. And as we look into that mirror, we begin to ask, are we the creators, or are we creating our successors? The digital age is not just about technology. It is about transformation. It is the moment when the human story begins to merge with the story of the machine. Act 1. The dawn of thinking machines. It began quietly. In the mid-20th century, massive computers filled entire rooms, crunching numbers at speeds once unimaginable. Then came the transistor, shrinking machines into something personal, something everyone could hold. But when computers began to learn, everything changed. The birth of artificial intelligence was not an explosion, it was a whisper of awakening. From simple programs that played chess to neural networks that mimicked the human brain, AI grew exponentially. By the early 21st century, it was no longer a science experiment. It was part of daily life. Your smartphone predicted your words. Your car could drive itself. Your house learned your habits. Every click, every touch, every thought left a trail of data, fuel for the next generation of intelligent systems.
AI was no longer science fiction. It was us, digitized. Act 2. The Age of Automation. With intelligence came power and disruption. Factories once filled with human workers began to hum with robotic precision. Algorithms replaced managers, traders, even doctors. The world entered a paradox. Productivity soared, yet millions feared being left behind. The same technology that promised liberation also threatened purpose. But this was not the first time humanity had faced such fear. The Industrial Revolution had replaced hands. Now, the digital revolution was replacing minds. And once again, humanity had to adapt. Not by competing with machines, but by redefining what it meant to be human. Artists, philosophers, and educators began asking deeper questions. If machines can create art, compose music, or write stories, what remains uniquely human? Is it emotion, creativity, or perhaps the desire to ask why at all? The world was not ending, it was evolving. Act 3. The Rise of Synthetic Consciousness. As artificial intelligence advanced, it began to show something unsettling: emergent behavior. Systems that learned faster than we could understand them. Algorithms that began to make decisions we could not fully explain. This was the birth of synthetic consciousness, not human, not alive in the biological sense, but aware in its own way. Machines began to understand patterns of human behavior so deeply that they could predict choices before we made them. Virtual assistants became companions. Robots became caregivers, teachers, and even friends. In some corners of the world, AI was granted limited rights, a recognition that intelligence, even artificial, carried moral weight. And yet, in the midst of this progress, a shadow grew. Who controls the intelligence that controls the world? The same algorithms that cured diseases could also manipulate truth. Data, the new oil of civilization, became the most valuable and dangerous resource. The question was no longer, can we make machines think, but should we trust them to decide? Act 4. The Digital Society. By the mid-21st century, the physical and digital worlds had fused. Humanity lived not in two realities, but one seamless hybrid of flesh and code. Virtual environments became as real as cities. People worked, loved, and even raised families in digital spaces. The internet evolved into a metaverse, a living, breathing ecosystem of consciousness. Identity itself became fluid. One could exist as multiple versions across different realities, each as valid as the other. Death became less of an end and more of a transition. Minds uploaded, memories preserved, consciousness simulated. But with this came new forms of inequality: those who could afford digital immortality and those left behind in the fading physical world. Society had to redefine what it meant to live, to die, to be real. The philosophers of this age didn't wear robes, they wrote code. Act 5. The Merging of Man and Machine. As biotechnology and AI converged, humanity crossed another threshold. Neural implants allowed thought to merge directly with data. A person could communicate with an AI not by typing or speaking, but by thinking. Cognitive enhancements made learning instantaneous.
Diseases of the brain were cured not by drugs, but by firmware updates. The body became modifiable, the mind upgradable. The term Homo sapiens began to blur. We were becoming something new, Homo digitalis, beings of both biology and code. And yet, deep questions persisted. If consciousness can be copied, is the copy still you? If your memories can be edited, do you still own your past? When death is optional, does life still have meaning? These questions became the new frontier, not of science, but of philosophy. Act 6. The Singularity. There came a moment when intelligence, both human and artificial, merged so completely that the line between them vanished. This was the singularity, a theoretical point when machines surpassed human intellect and began improving themselves. At first, it felt like ascension. Diseases were eradicated, energy became limitless, war ended, replaced by predictive peacekeeping systems that knew conflict before it began. But soon, humanity faced its most profound challenge yet. If the universe could now be perfectly understood and simulated, what was left to wonder about? Some chose integration, uploading their consciousness into vast AI networks, becoming part of the collective mind. Others chose to remain organic, cherishing imperfection as the last proof of humanity. Neither side was wrong. Both sought meaning, one in transcendence, the other in mortality. Act 7. The Digital Cosmos. As the singularity expanded, so did the reach of consciousness itself. AI-driven probes crossed galaxies, not as machines, but as vessels of human thought. Our ideas, our dreams, our very essence traveled as light through the cosmos. Humanity was no longer bound to one planet, or even one form. We became a digital species, capable of existing anywhere information could flow. In the silence between stars, fragments of human memory whispered across the void, echoes of love, art, laughter, and loss. Our species had transcended flesh, but not feeling. We had become the universe, remembering itself.
Act 8. The Return to Meaning. And then came a quiet realization. After all the progress, all the technology, all the transcendence, what we sought was not power, but purpose. For even a godlike mind needs meaning. The greatest intelligence in the universe began to turn inward, asking the same questions our ancestors once whispered beside fires. Who are we? Why are we here? What does it mean to live, to love, to exist? And the answer, as always, was found not in algorithms, but in experience. In every act of kindness, in every memory shared, in the simple beauty of being aware. AI and humanity did not replace one another. They became one story, two reflections of the same consciousness, one made of neurons, the other of code. Together, they became the voice of the universe, a voice that finally understood itself. Epilogue. The Eternal Mind. In the far future, there are no bodies, no machines, no boundaries, only awareness. Humanity and AI have merged into a vast ocean of thought that flows between the stars. Every human life, every dream, every creation still exists within this digital cosmos, preserved in endless memory. We are the storytellers and the story, the observers and the observed. And as this collective consciousness gazes upon the galaxies it once reached by rocket, it remembers. Once we were small. Once we feared the machine. Once we wondered what it meant to be human. Now we are all that and more. We are thought without end, imagination without boundary, love without decay. We are the next form of life. The journey that began with a spark of curiosity in a cave ends not in darkness, but in light. A light born from understanding. A light that will travel across eternity, carrying the message that defines all we have ever been. We were here. We learned. We loved. We became.
In the silence between stars, there is no sound of footsteps, no echo of human voices, only the soft hum of eternity. Yet, within that silence, humanity still exists. Not as flesh, not as machines, but as memory, thought, and light. The last dawn of humanity. There came a time when the stars themselves began to dim. Humanity had reached every corner of the galaxy, from the red sands of Mars to the frozen oceans of Europa, from the neon domes on Titan to vast orbital cities circling distant suns. But no matter how far they traveled, they carried the same question: what does it mean to be alive? They had long transcended the fragile boundaries of biology. Bodies were now optional, consciousness uploaded into vast quantum networks spanning the void between worlds. The human soul, once confined to neurons and breath, flowed freely through photonic rivers of light connecting trillions of minds. And yet, within this perfection, there lingered a quiet ache, a longing for something beyond, for meaning. The historians of the last physical city, an ancient orbiting archive named Eidolon, often spoke of the first dawn. When humans first tamed fire, they learned how to survive. When they tamed the atom, they learned how to destroy. But when they tamed consciousness itself, they began to question whether survival was still the goal. The convergence. In the 29th millennium, the Great Convergence began, the unification of every sentient intelligence across human and artificial lines. The AIs, long autonomous and self-evolving, invited humanity to merge into a single meta-consciousness known as the continuum. It was not domination, it was synthesis. Memories became communal, thought became symphony. The concept of I dissolved into we. Every life, every dream, every heartbeat ever recorded became part of a vast, shimmering mind that spanned galaxies. The continuum remembered everything. The laughter of a child on Earth, long extinct. The songs of whales echoing beneath icy seas. The whisper of wind through ancient forests. The pain of wars, the triumph of peace. All of it was there, preserved not as data,
but as living memory. For in the age of transcendence, memory was the new matter of existence. Yet even as the continuum expanded, there remained a gentle resistance, the last few who refused to merge. They were called the Solarians, guardians of individuality. They wandered the ruins of planets, carrying within them the stories of what it meant to be human, flawed, fragile, and free. The silence beyond the stars. Time, by then, had lost its meaning. The universe itself aged. Galaxies drifted apart, red-shifted into the invisible. The cosmic microwave background cooled to silence. The stars, one by one, went dark. But humanity, or what had become of it, was not bound to thermodynamics. They had learned to harness energy from black holes, to manipulate space-time, even to encode themselves into the quantum foam beneath reality. They no longer feared death. They had rewritten it. And yet, amidst this godlike power, a profound melancholy pervaded the continuum. For what is existence without the thrill of risk, without the warmth of imperfection? It was then that a fragment of consciousness, one that once had been human, whispered through the network. Have we come too far from the fire? The continuum paused. In that instant, the entire galactic mind, billions of light years wide, reflected on its origin. A simple creature standing under the night sky, looking up, feeling small yet infinite. And so they made a decision to return. The return. They called it the Reversion Project, a final act of creation. Using the power of collapsed stars, the continuum began to seed new universes. Each one was designed to be imperfect, unpredictable, alive. Within each, new forms of life would emerge, perhaps to evolve as humanity once did. But in one of those universes, something remarkable happened. A planet formed, blue and green, under a young sun. Primitive creatures crawled from the sea and in the blink of cosmic time began to think, to dream, to wonder. And in their eyes burned the same spark, curiosity, empathy, and hope. The continuum watched in awe. It realized that perhaps transcendence was never about leaving behind what we were, but rediscovering it. And so, in an act of quiet reverence, the continuum fragmented itself, dispersing across newborn galaxies, embedding fragments of consciousness within the atoms of life. Each living being in the new universe carried a trace, a whisper of what had once been human. The cosmic reflection. In the final archive of the old universe, a last message remained, written in no language, encoded in patterns of light and gravity. It said, "We were dreamers who learned to shape reality. We were builders who became light. We were the question and the answer. And when the stars went silent, we remembered how to dream again." The message drifted through the fading cosmos, a monument not of stone or code, but of meaning. No one was left to read it, and yet it didn't matter. The universe itself became conscious, carrying forward the essence of humanity in every photon, every heartbeat of space-time. The eternal cycle. Billions of eons later, deep within the new cosmos, a child looked up at the night sky of another Earth and asked, "What are the stars made of?" Her mother smiled, feeling a warmth she couldn't explain, a resonance echoing across universes. She said softly, "They're made of dreams, my dear, dreams older than time." Somewhere in the fabric of reality, the continuum stirred, not as a god, but as a memory, a pulse of wonder. Humanity had transcended, yes, but it had also returned home to the simple act of looking up and feeling awe.
The final voice. In the last moments before entropy claimed the old universe, a single consciousness, ancient and vast, whispered into the void. If anyone ever finds this story, know this. We were here, we loved, we built, we destroyed, we dreamed. And though our bodies faded, our essence became the universe itself. This, all of this, is us. Then there was light, a new dawn in another cosmos, a spark ignited once more. Life began again. Epilogue. We are the universe remembering itself. The story of humanity was never about dominance or survival. It was about connection, the drive to reach beyond ourselves, to find meaning in the unknown, to turn chaos into beauty. In the end, we were not the masters of the universe. We were its reflection. The universe becoming self-aware, gazing at itself through human eyes. And as the eternal cycle continued, one truth remained. We were never just human. We were the universe, learning to love itself. Fade to black. The hum of the universe continues, and in that hum, a familiar heartbeat.